the Arabian Racehorse Podcast with Debbie Burt and Stephen Molyneux.
Welcome to another edition of the Arabian Racehorse Podcast. I'm joined this week by Stephen Molyneux.
Hi there, Debbie. How are you?
Yeah, very good, very good. And this week we will be reviewing our most recent race, the Wathba Stallions Handicap at Chepstow. And then we'll be looking back to a maiden race that we had at Chelmsford, with several of those runners now being entered to run and declared to run, at Lingfield on Thursday. So yes, if we go to the Chepstow race, Stephen, what did you make of that? That was a win for Mizuno. Yeah,
it was a good competitive race, wasn't it? Mizuno was obviously stepping up fairly appreciably in trip, having run over the 6 furlongs on its previous 2 starts, and back over a more suitable trip was the obvious explanation for her bouncing back. I guess the Group 2 at Newbury just was it 6 days, 7 days, 5 days earlier, I think it was, would almost have felt like a breeze for her to set her up quite nicely for this handicap. And she's managed to win for the second time this season. I thought the Syndicate horse back in second, Autar, looked like winning for much of the race. Obviously, first start for James Owen, probably freshened up a little bit by a change of scenery, and she was also down 5 pounds in the weights, and having put up a bold show from the front, just proved to be a bit of a sitting duck there to the strongest players late on. But it was a good run, and I don't think they'll be too disappointed with either of the third or fourth either. Al Tabari, he travelled very well into the race, and he's proven a model of consistency. And Farisa, another one of the James Owen battalion, to finish in the first 3, showed a little bit more than she had done on a handicap debut. So no, I thought it was a pretty solid race, really.
Yeah, and of course Mizuno had the hood back on, which is she didn't have when she was at Newbury, and I think she travelled like the best horse throughout the race. Really, she was settled in behind and came through horses nicely. Back to Autar, she of course was running in a first-time tongue tie, which possibly may have made the difference. James put the cheek pieces back on, which she'd worn before when she was with Phil. But when I spoke to him after the race, he wasn't overly bothered about. He didn't think that it made a tremendous amount of difference. He looked he thought she was pretty genuine in the race, and so we may see her next time without those. As you say, Al Tabari, a model of consistency. What a super little horse. The races just aren't falling right for him this year, unfortunately. But I'm pretty sure he'll be back in the winners' enclosure at some point soon, when we've got slightly more races to choose from, which hopefully will be next year. We should be back more to like we were a couple of seasons ago, pre-COVID. Farasar, I bit disappointed, but she got stuck, didn't she, in behind horses, and the race didn't open up for her quite when she needed it to, and then it was all over by the time she got daylight. Abkari, I noted that none of the horses in that family have done well over a mile. So again, possibly he couldn't outrun his pedigree on that occasion. They're all more of a mile and a quarter horses and a little bit beyond. So I'm sure we'll see him to better effect back up in trip.
Yeah, and of course he'd beaten Al Tabari by a nose the time before, so he was unable to confirm that form. I think he was 3 pounds worse off for that nose victory. So it was probably a stiff enough task for him to try and confirm form with Al Tabari, and they're probably not far off a run to the pound, really. But as you say, that the longer trip would likely suit him. There was probably a bit in the fact that it was paid to be a bit closer to the rail, as it quite often does at Chepstow. The kind of field almost split into 2, really, didn't they? Those sort of 5 or 6 that initially came stand side, and a few of the others that stayed more towards the centre, and it didn't seem to involve those in the centre of the track. So maybe there's 1 or 2 to perhaps forgive from that. I think obviously Alouf was left in no man's land right from the start, so that was a run that you can ignore straight away. But I think most of these went a million miles away from form. Those that had been running well in handicaps came to the fore, and as we so often see, it's those right at the top of the weights that emerge on top, with Mizuno obviously the highest rated in the race at 81, and just that bit of class can often tell in these Arabian races. Unfortunately, sometimes it's not always as simple as it being a handicap. The better quality horses are the ones that can quite often concede that weight to the lesser horses.
Of course. And Speaking of horses which are coming from James Owen's stable, we've got another field where, again, for once, the winner came from Phil Collington, his first UK winner. Obviously, he's had winners abroad this season, but Alajab came good at Chelmsford a couple of meetings ago. We've skipped that because you weren't here last week, and it's always good to review a maiden race with the handicapper. So Alajab was obviously the horse with a bit of experience coming over from France, but it was his first run for Phil Collington, and a first winner back for his jockey Neil Callan, who obviously has been in Hong Kong. Yeah,
that was pretty notable, wasn't it? And I think a good boost for Arabian racing that it was on board an Arabian. It was a good ride as well because he was soon prominent on the 4-year-old, obviously displaying his experience from France, where they're well drilled, and maybe just that bit of experience just held sway in the end in holding off Mumayez, who was in receipt of a stone of weight, but ran perfectly creditably on his debut. I wasn't massively convinced it was the strongest maiden in the world. Obviously, there were only the 7 runners, and with it being on the all-weather, there are certain horses that can just get a bit too far out of their ground. I thought actually Sultana probably shaped best of all, really, back in third. It wasn't a debut that anywhere near got to the bottom of her. It was an educational run. She was staying on from a good way back, and I think she'll be a lot wiser for the run. And we know with Phil's, they are usually a little bit straighter for that first run as well. So I think she's if her and Mumayez were to ever meet sort of in the near future, then you'd almost expect her to turn the tables. But Al Mahbouba, we sort of gave him the benefit of the doubt, really, didn't we, after Lingfield, and that he came up against 2 promising 3-year-olds when making his UK debut from France. But it was probably a backward step, unfortunately, for him at Chelmsford. He could only manage 4th, and just showed that sort of awkward tail carriage and didn't look entirely in love with the game, should we say. And he was probably one of the disappointments back and forth, along with Al Khaliji, who was one of those aforementioned 3-year-olds that finished second in a conditions race at Newbury last time, and second ahead of Al Mahbouba in a Lingfield race, maiden race at Lingfield. And it was a notable step back from her, but given she's a 3-year-old, third start of the year, maybe you'd just be inclined to forgive her and hope that the promise of those first 2 runs still stood.
Yeah, and certainly with Al Khaliji, obviously it's easy to say so after the event, but I just thought she ran like a horse that probably had enough racing for the year. She's a very big, tall horse for a 3-year-old, and I just felt one run too many is what I'd sort of put in my notebook, really, with her. I'm sure she'll come back. I would imagine that would be it for her for the season, and she'll come back next year probably a stronger horse and leave that form behind, or at least one would hope so anyway. I thought Zaffarana I was interested in because she's a nice filly by De Hesse, and she was flashed her tail a few times in the straight, and that's always something that we take note of from time to time. And Al Mahbouba, Aldana and Mumayez, of course, all line up now in our race at Lingfield coming up on Thursday.
Yeah, and I mean Aldana was another one that probably didn't take a step forward from her debut. She'd been off a good while, hadn't she? Was it back in April that maiden she ran out in Wolverhampton? And
yeah,
Farasar, who she pulled clear with that day, not exactly pulled up too many trees in handicaps off 79. So maybe her rating was a touch flattering going into the race, and I think I might have pulled it down a few pounds. So she would hopefully have a better chance going forward. But Mumayez, meeting again in receipt of the 3-year-old's allowance on the back of that initial outing, you'd imagine that she'll be pretty difficult to beat at Lingfield.
Colt.
He'll be.
Sorry. Yeah, my only concern with Mumayez really, he's a nice looking horse and he ran very well, but it was only 2 weeks ago. Yeah. He's a 3-year-old. He quite clearly put up a good race to the winner. So I'd be a little bit concerned that maybe it would have come too soon. And we also noticed that he was the last horse in the paddock. They kept him well away from the other horses for as long as they possibly could. You suspect that possibly he might be a bit colty. There are plenty of fillies in this race coming up at Lingfield. So if I had to pick holes in him and look for a reason to oppose him, I mean, I'm sure he'll go off favourite. But yeah, I'd just be a bit concerned. Majal Arabs, they seem to be sort of one of two horses. They're either very laid back and very calm, like a horse like RB Byrne, or they're a little bit more excitable. So one would hope for the Shadwell team's sake that he's going to turn into the more quiet horses. But yeah, I'd just be a little bit cautious, other than the fact that obviously that was a good run that he put up at Chelmsford.
Yeah, and I always think Chelmsford is probably one of the tougher all-weather surfaces that we race on in England. It's obviously, I'd say it's a bit, it certainly appears to be a bit deeper than, well, definitely Lingfield anyway, and probably Wolverhampton as well. And there's a step up in trip to contend with as well, going up 3 furlongs in trip at Lingfield, 10 furlongs we race over. So yeah, there'd be 1 or 2 question marks, and obviously we're at the stage of the season where they've just got to get the runs in, and you know, on paper it's a presentable enough opportunity for him to get his head in front. But yeah, I probably agree with you that there are 1 or 2 question marks hanging over this sort of slightly different set of circumstances on Wednesday.
And we've got some newcomers in the race. We have Mathael, who's an Al Jackbar filly, the mount of Dane O'Neill. She's related to winners, but they've all needed a few runs before they got off the mark. Yeah,
and there are plenty of horses in this with experience that would be a doubt, I suppose. But you know, of the 4 Shadwell horses, I know they've not always got it right jockey bookings wise this year, but you'd imagine Dane O'Neill is presumably on the 2nd string, although 8 stone 11. I don't know whether that would be at the upper end of his weight limits, Dane. So maybe Mathael is not the 2nd string, but I suppose the horse he's making the debut at this time of year maybe is a little bit more backward as well than some of the ones we've seen already.
Yeah, and of course it's a 4-year-old as well. So we'll have obviously paddock check advised with all these ones, as we say. But one that caught my eye of the debutants really was AJS Hajjaj, the Mount of Tad O'Shea, who's a first Qatari runner for the owner, whose name escapes me for the minute, but it's the first Arabian runner in this country for him, although he has had thoroughbreds running over here. He's a 3 parts brother to a dual Group 2 winner. The Dam won the Hatter. So he's certainly one of interest. He's by AF Al-Bahar, who's the sire of Aldana, and also Munir, who've both done well this year. So I'll certainly be having a look at him in the paddock.
Yeah, notice I don't know where Tig's based at the moment. I know he lives in Ireland, but whether he's having a spell in the UK, he usually has 4 or 6 weeks in the UK, probably just trying to avoid the tax man more than anything. But if he has made the trip over from Ireland, then that's even more notable. He might probably stick around for the Derby as well at the St. Leger. But just the very fact that he's riding this horse, he'll have gone out of his way, no doubt, to try and get the ride. And I think that's probably more notable than anything that Tig is on board, particularly with the connections he has or has had in the past with Shadwell, and obviously he's ridden a winner for Phil Collington in recent weeks. So I'd take that as a positive that Tig is riding that horse.
Absolutely. And of course, other early runners, we've got Belle Angelique, who had a bit of a setback earlier this year, so probably best to watch her this time out. She's related to a couple of useful handicappers. Gethley Wen won, I think, 3 or 4 races when trained by Jenny Lees, who is part of Dillman Racing, who owns the horse. And of course, Kayak, who's a local runner. He's showing up again. Obviously, it's a big ask for him to give away all that weight at the top of the field to a lot of very unexposed and potentially quite useful horses further down.
Yeah, it's, I mean, again, very sporting that the horse is in the race, but rated 51, giving £3 or £4, I think it is, to the and upwards. Obviously, the 3-year-olds are in receipt of much more weights, £17 in total. So it's going to be very difficult for that horse Kayak to finish in the first 4 or 5, but you never know. Bit of experience on the day, and it could go a long way. But you'd be a little bit surprised if if either Kayak or Belle Angelique, who's obviously taken a while to get to the track, 5-year-old mare, and you'd imagine handicaps for her will be more's the thing down the line, and maybe just trying to get a mark today or on Wednesday, and hope that they can sort of plan a handicap campaign for next season.
Of course. Well, it certainly looks an interesting race on paper, and we'll be back to review that, and then to look forward to our next group race, which of course is the formerly the Arrow Cup, but it's the Sheikha Fatima bint Mubarak Cup, which will be run at Haydock at the beginning of September.
Yeah, we'll look forward to those.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Stephen.
No problem.
And we'll see you all next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.